It takes years to build a life, but only one night to destroy it. At 6:00 a.m., on a rainy Tuesday in October, Richard Dalton walked through the front door of his million-dollar home, expecting to find his wife asleep and his newborn son in his crib. He was tired, he was hungover, and he was reeking of another woman's perfume. But when Richard walked up those stairs, he didn't find a sleeping family. He didn't find a note. He found a silence so loud it threatened to shatter his eardrums. In the span of 8 hours, while he was betraying his vows, his wife Sarah had performed a magic trick that would haunt him forever. She had vanished into thin air, taking their 3-month-old baby with her. And the worst part, she knew exactly what he was doing while she packed the bags. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the dirt streak. Richard Dalton sat in his black Range Rover, the engine idling, watching the wipers slash back and forth against the grey morning light. His head was throbbing with the dull, rhythmic pulse of a Scotch hangover. He checked his reflection in the rearview mirror. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he was handsome enough to get away with it. He always was. At 34, Richard was the youngest partner at Dalton and Hames Real Estate, a man who built skyscrapers and broke promises with equal efficiency. He rubbed his neck, trying to scrub away the phantom sensation of Vanessa's lips. "Stupid," he muttered to himself, shifting the car into gear. "Just keep it together. Rick, business trip. You were in Portland. The meeting ran late. The hotel had bad reception." He rehearsed the lies as he pulled out of the parking structure of the Hotel Lusso, a boutique establishment 3 miles from his home, far enough to be discreet, close enough to be convenient. Vanessa Cole, his mistress of 4 months, was still asleep in room 412. She was 23, an interior designer with a laugh that made Richard feel young and a lack of inhibitions that made him feel powerful. Sarah, his wife, was different. Sarah was safe. Sarah was the mother of his child. She was soft-spoken, organized, and lately entirely consumed by the exhausting demands of their 3-month-old son. Leo. Richard told himself he deserved this break. The crying, the sleepless nights, Sarah's postpartum exhaustion. It had all become a suffocating fog. Vanessa was his oxygen. He drove through the upscale neighborhood of Queen Anne, the houses looming like fortresses in the mist. When he pulled into his driveway, the house looked normal. The porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. It was the picture of suburban tranquility. Richard killed the engine and took a deep breath. He sprayed a burst of mint breath freshener, checked his collar for lipstick, and stepped out into the rain. He unlocked the front door quietly, practicing the stealthy entry he'd perfected over the last few months. Click. The heavy oak door swung open. Usually, the house smelled like lavender detergent and warm milk. Today, it smelled of nothing. It was a sterile, cold scent, like a house that hadn't been lived in for weeks. "Sarah," he whispered, closing the door behind him. Silence. He checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. Usually, Leo would be stirring for his morning feed. Sarah would be in the kitchen, exhausted, brewing her decaf coffee. Richard walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops were gleaming. There were no bottles drying on the rack. The coffee machine was cold and empty. A strange knot of anxiety began to tighten in his stomach, not the guilt he was used to, but something primal. "Sarah," he called out, louder this time. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The master bedroom door was ajar. He pushed it open. The bed was made military tight, not slept in. "Okay, calm down," Richard whispered, his heart rate spiking. Maybe she went to her mum's. Maybe Leo got sick. He turned and rushed down the hall to the nursery. The door was painted a soft sage green. He pushed it open, expecting to see the rise and fall of the baby's chest in the crib. The crib was empty. Not just empty of a baby. The mattress was bare. The sheets were gone. The mobile that spun little wooden stars above the crib had been taken down. Richard spun around. The changing table was cleared off. No diapers, no wipes, no creams. No, no, no. He ran back to the master bedroom and threw open the walk-in closet. Sarah's side was decimated. Her clothes, the sensible sweaters, the nursing tops. The jeans were gone. The hangers swung emptily on the rack, clicking against each other in the draught. He ran to the bathroom. Her toothbrush gone. Her makeup gone. He ran downstairs to the living room. The digital picture frame on the mantelpiece gone. It wasn't a kidnapping. Kidnappers didn't take toothbrushes. Kidnappers didn't strip the crib sheets. Richard stood in the center of his living room, the silence pressing in on him. He pulled out his phone and dialed Sarah's number. The number you have dialed is no longer in service. Please check the number and try again. He froze. He dialed again. The number you have dialed. What the hell? Richard screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. He dialed the landline. It rang in the kitchen, loud and shrill, answering no one. He needed to think. He needed to find a note. People left notes. In the movies, there was always a note on the pillow or magnet tacked to the fridge. He tore the kitchen apart. He checked the bedside tables. He checked the dining table. Nothing. Then, his eyes landed on the kitchen island. There was one thing left behind. It sat squarely in the center of the marble counter. Small and metallic. It was her wedding ring. Next to it was his own spare house key. Richard picked up the ring. It was cold. He stared at the diamond he had bought her 5 years ago, a symbol of a promise he had broken just 6 hours prior. He realized then that this wasn't a sudden decision. You don't pack a house this cleanly in an hour. You don't disconnect a phone line by accident. He looked at the calendar on the fridge. Yesterday's date, October 14th, had a red circle around it. Written inside the circle, in Sarah's neat, looping handwriting, was a single word, freedom. Richard dropped the ring. It clattered on the floor, the sound like a gunshot in the empty house. He wasn't just alone. He had been erased. Panic is a cold bucket of water, but self-preservation is a fire. Richard Dalton stood in his kitchen for 10 minutes, hyperventilating, before the lawyer in him took over. She took the baby. That was the only thought that mattered. Sarah could leave him hell, part of him. The dark part he didn't talk about, was almost relieved to be free of the judgment. But she had taken his son, his heir. He grabbed his phone again. Who to call? Not the police. Not yet. If he called the police, they would ask where he was last night. He called Margaret, Sarah's mother. Margaret lived 40 minutes away in Bellevue. She was a stern woman who had never particularly liked Richard, sensing the ambition that eclipsed his empathy. Hello. Margaret's voice was groggy. It was barely 7:15 a.m. Margaret, is Sarah with you? Richard asked, his voice tight. He didn't have to fake the panic. Richard, no. Why would she be here? Isn't she home? She's gone. Margaret, the baby is gone. Her clothes are gone. What do you mean, gone? Margaret's voice sharpened instantly. Did you two fight? No, I was away on business in Portland last night. I just got home. The house is empty. She cleared out the nursery. There was a pause on the line, a heavy, judgmental silence. You were in Portland. Yes. Richard lied smoothly. I got in 10 minutes ago. Margaret, did she say anything to you? Was she acting strange? She called me yesterday afternoon, Margaret said slowly. She sounded fine. She asked about my roses. She let me hear Leo cooing. She didn't say anything about leaving. She disconnected her phone. Margaret, I can't track her. I'm coming over, Margaret said, the phone clicking dead before Richard could argue. Richard cursed. He didn't want Margaret there. He wanted answers. But now he had to call the police. If he waited too long, it would look suspicious. He dialed 911. 911, what is your emergency? My wife. She's missing. She took our baby. I think she's been abducted, or she left, I don't know. The house is just empty. Sir, take a deep breath. What is your address? Richard gave the address. He paced the living room floor, his shoes clicking on the hardwood. He needed to clean up. Not the house. The house was spotless. But himself. He smelled like Vanessa's perfume. Chanel, no. 5. It was distinctive. He ran upstairs, stripped off his suit, and threw it into the hamper. No, that was risky. He took the suit out, wadded it up, and shoved it into the back of his own closet, behind his gym bags. He jumped into the shower, scrubbing his skin until it was red, washing away the scent of the affair. He brushed his teeth 3 times. He dressed in casual clothes, jeans, and a sweater, the worried dad uniform. By the time he got downstairs, blue and red lights were flashing against the living room walls. 2 officers arrived first, followed shortly by a detective in a cheap raincoat. The detective introduced himself as Detective Holloway. He was an older man, heavy-set, with eyes that looked like they had seen every lie humanity had to offer. Mr. Dalton, Holloway said, stepping into the foyer. He didn't wipe his feet. You said your wife and child are gone. Yes, look. Richard gestured to the living room. She took everything personal. Pictures, laptop, the baby's gear. Holloway walked through the house slowly. He touched the empty crib. He looked at the empty hangers in the closet. He picked up the wedding ring from the kitchen floor where Richard had dropped it. She left the ring, Holloway noted, bagging it. That's a statement. I don't understand, Richard said, rubbing his face. We were fine. We were happy. Were you? Holloway turned, his eyes locking onto Richard's. Happy wives don't usually clear out the nursery in the middle of the night. Mr. Dalton. We had normal stress, Richard said defensively. New baby, lack of sleep, but nothing like this. When was the last time you saw her? Yesterday morning, before I left for work. I drove to Portland for a site visit. Stayed overnight at the Benson. Drove back this morning. Holloway pulled out a notepad. The Benson in Portland. Can anyone verify that Richard's heart hammered against his ribs? He had booked a room at the Benson online, just in case, but he hadn't checked in. He hoped to God the hotel systems were messy. I didn't actually check in, Richard improvised, his brain firing rapidly. I worked late at the site, met with some contractors, and ended up crashing in my car for a few hours at a rest stop. I wanted to get home to Sarah and Leo early, so I just drove back. It was a weak lie. He knew it. Holloway knew it. You slept in your Range Rover, a man in a $3,000 suit. Holloway raised an eyebrow. I was exhausted. Richard snapped. Look, why are you grilling me? My wife is missing. She has a 3-month-old infant. She could be in danger, or she could be escaping," Holloway said, calm. "Adults are allowed to leave their spouses, Mr. Dalton, unless there is evidence of foul play, or the child is in immediate danger. This is a domestic dispute." "She disconnected her phone," Richard yelled. "She cleared out the accounts." He froze. He hadn't checked the accounts yet. Holloway smiled, a thin, predatory smile. "You didn't mention the accounts before. Did she clear them out?" Richard pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he opened his banking app. He logged in. Balance $0. He checked the savings. Balance $0. He checked the joint investment fund. Balance $14.52. "Oh my God," Richard whispered. "She took it all. Over $200,000 liquid." "Well," Holloway said, snapping his notebook shut. "That confirms she planned this. This wasn't an abduction. Mr. Dalton, your wife left you, and she took a severance package." Just then, the front door burst open. Margaret stormed in, wet from the rain, her face a mask of fury. "Where is she?" Margaret screamed, lunging at Richard. "What did you do to her?" "I didn't do anything," Richard held his hands up. "She robbed me. Margaret. She took Leo and the money and ran. Sarah wouldn't take a dime that wasn't hers." Margaret spat. She turned to the detective. "Check his phone. Check his credit cards. If my daughter ran, it's because he gave her a reason to—" Richard felt the blood drain from his face. His phone was in his pocket. It was full of texts from Vanessa. "Last night was amazing. When can you get away again?" If Holloway looked at that phone, Richard's Portland alibi would disintegrate instantly. "I'm willing to cooperate," Richard said, his voice steady despite the terror gripping his throat. "But right now, I want to find my son." "We'll find him," Holloway said. "But first, Mr. Dalton, I'm going to need you to come down to the station, and I'm going to need to see your car." "My car?" "Yes. You said you slept in it. There should be evidence of that. And if you drove from Portland this morning, the engine heat and the mileage will match that story." Richard looked out the window at his Range Rover. He had driven 3 miles from the Hotel Lusso, not 180 miles from Portland. The engine would be barely warm. The mileage log would show a short trip. He was trapped, and Sarah was nowhere to be found. The interview room at the Seattle Police Department smelled of stale coffee and desperation. It was a small, grey box with a 2-way mirror that everyone knew was there, but pretended not to see. Richard Dalton sat at the metal table, his hands clasped tight to stop them from shaking. He had been there for 2 hours. Detective Holloway walked in, carrying a thick file and 2 styrofoam cups. He placed one in front of Richard. "Black. No sugar." "Figured you look like a purist," Holloway said, sitting down heavily opposite him. "I drink lattes," Richard muttered, staring at the dark liquid. "Can I go? Am I under arrest?" "You're not under arrest, Mr. Dalton. You're voluntarily helping us locate your missing wife and child," Holloway corrected, his tone deceptively mild. "Unless, of course, you'd prefer to leave if you walk out that door. We might have to wonder why a man whose infant son is missing is so eager to stop talking to the people trying to find him." Richard stayed seated. He knew the game. He was a lawyer, for God's sake. But criminal law wasn't his field. He dealt in contracts and property disputes. This was visceral. This was messy. "Let's go back to the timeline," Holloway said, opening the file. "You left for Portland at what time yesterday?" "Around 10 a.m. Richard lied. And you arrived noon, maybe 12:30. We checked the traffic cams on I-5 South, Holloway said, not looking up from his notes. We didn't see your Range Rover. Richard's throat went dry. I took the back roads. Scenic route. Wanted to clear my head. Scenic route to a business meeting. Holloway raised an eyebrow. Okay. And the meeting? Who was it with? A developer? Potential client? Names? Smith. John Smith. Richard winced internally. John Smith, really, John Smith, Holloway repeated flatly. And does Mr. Smith have a phone number, a company name? It was informal. We met at a coffee shop. I don't have his card on me. Holloway sighed, leaning back in his chair. The chair creaked loudly in the small room. Mr. Dalton, let's cut the crap. We pulled your cell phone records. Richard froze. He hadn't given them his phone. We don't need your physical phone for the tower pings, Holloway explained, tapping a piece of paper. Your phone never left the greater Seattle area yesterday. In fact, it spent most of last night pinging off a tower 3 miles from your house. Near the Hotel Lusso, the room seemed to shrink. The air grew thin. And, Holloway continued, we spoke to the valet at the Hotel Lusso. Nice kid. Remembers your car. Remembers you. And he remembers the blonde woman you were with. Late 20s. Not your wife. Richard closed his eyes. The house of cards wasn't just falling. It was being incinerated. Her name is Vanessa Cole, Richard whispered. There was no point in lying now. She's a friend. A friend you share a hotel room with while your wife is at home, with a newborn. Holloway's voice hardened. So, let's revise the story. You weren't in Portland. You were cheating on your wife. You got home at 6:00 a.m. to find she was gone. Is that the truth? Yes, Richard said, his voice cracking. Yes, that's the truth. I'm an adulterer. Okay, I'm a scumbag. But I didn't hurt her. I didn't do anything to Sarah or Leo. That gives her motive to leave, Holloway mused. But it doesn't explain the efficiency. A woman doesn't just wake up, realize her husband is cheating, and vanish without a trace in 6 hours unless she already knew. Unless she was planning it. Holloway leaned forward, his face inches from Richard's. Did she know? Richard, I don't think so. I was careful. Clearly not careful enough. Holloway scoffed. We checked the joint accounts. You said she took the money? She didn't just take it. She transferred it to a crypto exchange in Malta, untraceable. And then she deleted herself. Her social media, gone. Her email accounts deactivated. Her phone, burner. She didn't just leave. Richard, she ghosted her entire existence. That takes preparation. That takes help. Help. Richard looked up. You think someone helped her? A woman with a 3-month-old baby doesn't pull off a disappearance like this alone, Holloway said. Who was she close to? Besides her mother. No one, Richard said. She was isolated. She stayed home with the baby. She didn't have friends here. We moved for my job last year. Everyone has someone. Holloway said. We found a recurring number on the phone logs from the house landline. Calls to a number in Chicago. Lasting hours. Do you know who she knows in Chicago? Chicago. Richard frowned. No. She's from Ohio. We lived in New York before this. We don't know anyone in Chicago. Holloway wrote something down. Well, someone in Chicago knows her. And they've been talking a lot. While you were at the Hotel Lusso, your wife was planning her exit. Richard felt a surge of irrational anger. He had been the one stepping out. Yes. But the idea that Sarah, sweet, Boring, dependable Sarah had been plotting against him, that she had a secret life, a secret confidant in Chicago. It felt like a betrayal worse than his own. "Find her," Richard hissed. "Find her and bring my son back." "We've put out an Amber Alert," Holloway said, standing up. "But since she is the custodial parent, and there's no evidence of immediate danger to the child other than your word, it's tricky. She hasn't broken a law by leaving you." "Richard," taking the money. "That's a civil matter between spouses. Unless we can prove the child is at risk, you're just a guy whose wife got tired of his crap and left." "She kidnapped my son. She's his mother," Holloway corrected. "And right now, to the world, you're the villain in this story. You might want to call a lawyer, a divorce lawyer, and maybe a criminal one, too, just in case." Holloway opened the door. "You can go, but don't leave town, and stay away from Vanessa Cole. If Sarah is watching, you don't want to give her more ammunition." Richard walked out of the station into the blinding afternoon sun. He felt naked, exposed. His phone buzzed. It was Vanessa. "Where are you? I'm worried." He deleted the text. He deleted her number. He got into his car and screamed until his throat was raw. 3 days passed. The silence in the house was a physical weight. Richard had taken a leave of absence from the firm. "Family emergency," he told the managing partner, Greg Hames. Greg knew the truth. Rumors travel faster than light in high-end real estate, but he was kind enough not to say it. Richard spent his days in the nursery, sitting in the rocking chair, staring at the empty space where the crib used to be. He replayed every interaction with Sarah from the last 6 months. Had she seemed distant? Yes, but he thought it was the baby. Had she been hiding her phone? Maybe. He hadn't been paying attention. He was obsessed with the Chicago number Holloway had mentioned. The police wouldn't give it to him, ongoing investigation, but Richard wasn't helpless. He hired a private investigator, a guy named Kieran Vance. Vance was expensive, discreet, and operated in the grey areas that Richard usually avoided. Vance came to the house on Thursday evening. He was a small, wiry man with a tablet tucked under his arm and a vape pen he puffed on constantly. "Nice place," Vance said, looking around the empty living room. Echoey. "Did you find the number?" Richard asked, ignoring the small talk. He poured 2 glasses of scotch. He was drinking too much. But he didn't care. "I did," Vance said, taking the glass. "And it's weird. Mr. Dalton. Very weird." "What is it?" "A lover." "No." Vance tapped his tablet. "The number belongs to a burner phone. Unregistered, prepaid. Impossible to trace to a person directly. But..." He swiped the screen and turned the tablet toward Richard. "I ran a trace on the IP address used to top up the phone's credit. It was topped up online using a prepaid Visa card. The IP address traces back to a public library in, wait for it, Naperville, Illinois. Naperville." Richard frowned. "That's a suburb of Chicago." "Right. But here's the kicker. I cross-referenced the dates of the top-ups with the dates of the calls to your wife. They match perfectly. Whoever this is, they were coordinating with her. But I dug deeper. I looked into Sarah's past, things before she met you. I know her past." Richard said. "She was a teacher. She lived in Ohio. Did you know she was in foster care for 2 years when she was 16? Richard paused, the glass halfway to his mouth. "What? No. Her parents?" "Margaret." "Margaret is her stepmother," Vance said. "Her biological father died when she was 15. Her mother died when she was 3. She went into the system for 2 years before Margaret, her father's ex-wife, petitioned for custody and got her out. It's all sealed records, usually, but I have friends. She never told me. Richard whispered. She said Margaret was her mum. People hide trauma. Vance shrugged. But in that foster home in Ohio, a place called the Saint, Jude's home for girls, she had a roommate, a girl named Emily Thorne. Richard shook his head. I've never heard that name. Emily Thorne had a rougher ride than Sarah. Multiple arrests, petty theft, fraud. She fell off the grid about 5 years ago. But guess where her last known address was? Naperville. Richard guessed. Bingo. Vance smiled grimly. Sarah wasn't talking to a lover. She was talking to an old friend. A friend who knows how to disappear. A friend who knows how to fake identities. Richard stood up and paced the room. So this Emily. She helped Sarah plan this. It looks like it. And if Emily is involved, Sarah isn't just gone. She's been scrubbed. Emily Thorne was suspected of running a small-time identity theft ring in 2018. She knows how to create new people. So Sarah isn't Sarah anymore. Richard realized she's someone else. Exactly. And she has your son. Vance put the tablet down. There's one more thing. I checked your credit card statements again. The ones you gave me access to. Not the main ones. The old ones. The ones you haven't used in years. And there was a charge on a dormant Amex card 3 weeks ago. It was small. $49.99. Easy to miss if you aren't looking. What was it for? A background check service. Someone ran a background check. On who me know? Vance looked Richard in the eye. On Vanessa Cole. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. She knew. He whispered. She knew 3 weeks ago. She looked her up. She knew everything. Vance confirmed. She didn't leave because she was heartbroken. Mr. Dalton. She left because she was done. She waited until she had all the pieces in place, the money, the new ID from Emily, the timing of your business trip, and then she executed. This was a tactical strike. Richard sank onto the sofa. He felt a strange mix of horror and admiration. Sarah, the quiet woman who knitted blankets and worried about organic baby food, was a mastermind. She had played him. She had let him think he was the clever one, the one getting away with something, while she was building a trap door beneath his feet. Where is she now? Richard asked, his voice hollow. If she's with Emily, she could be anywhere, but people tend to stick to what they know. I found a link between Emily Thorne and a property management company in Montana, a shell company. They own a few cabins in the middle of nowhere. Montana, Richard repeated. Big sky country. A good place to hide. I can go there, Vance said. I can scope it out, but it'll cost you. And if the police find out you're hunting her... Screw the police, Richard snapped. They think this is a civil dispute. They aren't looking for her. They're waiting for her to turn up. I need to find my son. All right. Vance stood up. I'll book a flight to Bozeman. I'll need a retainer. $5,000. Done. As Vance left, Richard walked to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving the street slick and black under the streetlights. He thought of Leo, his tiny hands, his laugh. Sarah had taken him to protect him. She would say, to keep him away from a cheating father. You think you've won? Sarah, Richard whispered to the empty glass. You think you're the hero of this story. But you don't know what I'm willing to do. He wasn't just going to find them. He was going to take Leo back. and he was going to destroy the new life she was trying to build, brick by brick. He picked up his phone and dialed Vanessa's number. He had deleted it, but he knew it by heart. It rang 3 times. "Rick." Her voice was small, frightened. "I thought you said." "I changed my mind," Richard said, his voice cold and steady. "I need your help. Vanessa. My help with what Sarah knows about us. She ran because of us. So now you're going to help me get my son back. You owe me that." There was a silence on the line. Then, a hesitant. "What do you want me to do?" "Pack a bag," Richard said. "We're going to Montana. Montana is vast. It swallows sound and secrets with equal indifference." The drive from the Bozeman airport was long and tense. Richard sat in the passenger seat of the rental SUV, staring out at the endless stretches of pine and sky. Vanessa drove, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "You haven't said a word in 2 hours," she said, her voice thin. "Are we really doing this? Just showing up?" "Vance said the property is under a shell company linked to Emily Thorne," Richard replied, not looking at her. "It's a long shot, but it's the only shot." Kieran Vance had texted coordinates earlier that morning. A remote cabin near Big Sky, off the main roads, accessible only by a gravel track that wound up into the mountains. It was isolated, perfect for hiding a baby, perfect for a woman who wanted to disappear. "What if she's not there?" Vanessa asked. "What if it's just some guy?" "Then we apologize and leave," Richard said. "But if she is there—" He let the sentence hang. "If she is there," Vanessa continued, glancing at him, "what then? You snatch the baby and run. That's kidnapping." "Rick." "She kidnapped him first?" Richard snapped, turning to face her. "She took my son across state lines. She cleaned out our accounts. I'm retrieving my property. My family." Vanessa flinched at the word property. She was beginning to see a side of Richard she hadn't seen in the hotel rooms and wine bars. This Richard was cold, jagged, and frighteningly focused. They turned onto the gravel road. The SUV bumped and jostled as they climbed higher. The air grew thinner, crisper. Snow dusted the tops of the trees, a stark contrast to the grey rain of Seattle. Finally, the trees broke. In a small clearing sat a cabin. It was rustic logs, a stone chimney, a wide porch. A wisp of smoke curled from the chimney. "Someone's home," Richard whispered. He signaled for Vanessa to stop the car about 50 yards down the drive, hidden by a bend in the road. "Stay here," he ordered. "Keep the engine running. Rick, just do it." Richard got out. The mountain air bit at his face. He wasn't dressed for this. He was wearing a light jacket and city boots. He crept through the trees, circling the cabin to get a view of the back. There was a large window, looking into what must be the living room. Richard approached it carefully, stepping over fallen branches, his heart hammered in his chest, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. He peered inside. The interior was warm, lit by a fire. Rugs covered the floor. And there, sitting on a worn leather sofa, was Sarah. She looked different. Her hair, usually long and blonde, was cut short and dyed a dark brown. She wore flannel and jeans, looking more like a local than the suburban housewife he knew, and in her arms was Leo. Richard felt a surge of emotion that nearly buckled his knees. His son, alive, safe. But then, another figure entered the room. A woman, tall, with sharp features and a tattoo sleeve on her arm. This must be Emily Thorne. She carried 2 mugs of tea and sat down next to Sarah. They were talking, laughing even. Sarah looked relaxed. She looked free. Richard's relief turned into a hot, blinding rage. She was playing house with a criminal while he was losing his mind. He moved to the back door. It looked flimsy. He tested the handle. Locked. He looked around for a key, a rock, anything. Then he stopped. If he broke in now, with Emily there, it could get violent. Emily looked tough. Sarah would fight. He needed leverage. He crept back to the car. Vanessa jumped when he opened the door. "She's there," Richard said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "She's with the friend, the ex-con." "Oh my God." Vanessa breathed. "Is the baby okay?" "He's fine, but we can't just walk in. I need you to go to the door." Vanessa's eyes widened. "Why me?" "Because she doesn't know what you look like." Richard lied. Sarah knew Vanessa's name, but she had never seen her face. "Not really. You pretend to be lost. Car trouble? Ask to use their phone. Get them to open the door. Once it's open, I'll rush in." "Rick, this is insane. This is a home invasion." "This is a rescue mission," Richard hissed, grabbing her arm. "Do you want to be the reason I lose my son? Do you want to be the mistress who destroyed a family and then did nothing to fix it?" Vanessa looked at him, tears welling in her eyes. She was trapped. She nodded slowly. "Good girl," Richard said, releasing her. "Go." Vanessa walked up the driveway, her boots crunching on the gravel. Richard shadowed her in the trees, moving closer to the porch. She knocked on the heavy wooden door. Thud, thud, thud. Inside. The laughter stopped. Richard saw Sarah tense up through the window. Emily stood up, moving with a cat-like grace to the window. She peered out, saw a lone woman standing by a car, or so she thought. Emily opened the door, leaving the chain on. "Can I help you?" Emily asked, her voice guarded. "I'm so sorry," Vanessa stammered, shivering for real in the cold. "My car, my GPS sent me up here, and then my tire blew out down the road. I don't have any signal. Can I please use your landline to call a tow truck?" Emily looked her up and down. "You're alone?" "Yes, please. I'm freezing." Emily hesitated, then undid the chain. "Okay, come in. Quick." The door swung open. Richard burst from the trees. He sprinted up the steps, shoving Vanessa aside and slamming into the door before Emily could close it. "Richard," Emily shouted, trying to block him, but he used his shoulder to ram past her. She stumbled back, tripping over a rug. Richard stood in the living room, chest heaving. Sarah was on the sofa, clutching Leo to her chest. Her eyes went wide, filled with terror. "Hello, honey," Richard panted. "Honey, I'm home." The silence in the cabin was heavier than the mountain air outside. The fire crackled, oblivious to the tension that threatened to snap the room in half. Sarah stood up slowly, positioning her body between Richard and the baby. Her face wasn't the tear-streaked mask of a victim. It was stone cold. "Get out," she said. Her voice was low, steady. "I'm taking my son." "Sarah," Richard said, taking a step forward. "You can play Thelma and Louise all you want, but you aren't keeping him from me." Emily scrambled to her feet, grabbing a heavy iron poker from the fireplace. "You take one more step, and I swear to God I'll break your knees." Richard laughed, a harsh, jagged sound. "You a two-bit identity thief. Go ahead. Hit me. Then I'll call the cops and tell them exactly where you are and who you're hiding." He turned back to Sarah. "You really thought this through. Didn't you fake names? Burner phones. But you forgot one thing: I have resources. I have money. You can't outrun me. I didn't run to hide," Sarah said, her eyes flashing. "I ran to save him. Save him from what? A stable home. A father who provides everything from a father who doesn't even know his middle name." Sarah shouted, her composure cracking. "Do you know it?" "Richard. Do you know Leo's middle name?" Richard paused. "Leo. Leo." He knew it was something traditional. "James William, it's Thomas," Sarah spat. "After my father. You signed the birth certificate without even reading it." "You were on a call with her." She pointed a shaking finger at Vanessa, who was hovering in the doorway, looking horrified. Richard glanced at Vanessa, then back to Sarah. "So this is about the affair, Vanessa. I cheated. Crucify me in divorce court. Take half the assets, but you don't get to steal my child. It's not just the affair." Richard Sarah's voice rose to a scream. "It's the indifference. It's the way you look at him like he's an accessory, a prop for your family man image. You don't love him. You love owning him." "Give me the boy," Richard growled, lunging forward. Emily swung the poker. It connected with Richard's forearm with a sickening crack. Richard yelled in pain, stumbling back. He clutched his arm, eyes watering. "You bitch, get out!" Emily screamed, raising the poker again. But Richard didn't leave. Adrenaline flooded his system, masking the pain. He charged Emily, tackling her to the ground. The poker skittered across the floor. They grappled, knocking over a lamp, crashing into the coffee table. Vanessa screamed. Stop it!" Sarah clutched Leo tighter, retreating into the kitchen. She grabbed a knife from the counter, a large chef's knife. Richard threw Emily off him. He was bigger, stronger. He stood up, breathing hard, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. "Don't make me do this." "Sarah," he said, walking toward the kitchen. "Stay back." Sarah brandished the knife. "I will use this." "Richard, I swear." Richard stopped at the kitchen threshold. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw a stranger. This wasn't the woman he had married. This was a mother cornered. "Vanessa," Richard called out without turning around. "Get the car seat from the SUV." "Rick, we can't get the seat." Vanessa ran out the door. "You're insane," Sarah whispered. "You can't just take a breastfeeding infant. Watch me." Richard made his move. He feinted left, then lunged right. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, twisting it until she dropped the knife. It clattered to the floor. Sarah screamed, kicking and clawing at him, but he shoved her back against the counter. He pinned her with one arm and reached for Leo with the other. The baby started to wail a thin, high-pitched cry of distress. "It's okay, buddy," Richard grunted, wrestling the baby from Sarah's grip. "Daddy's got you." "No." "Leo," Sarah shrieked, her voice tearing raw. Emily appeared in the doorway, blood on her lip. She held a shotgun. "Let him go," Emily said, cocking the gun. "Tsk-tsk." Richard froze, holding the crying baby. He turned slowly. The barrel of the shotgun was leveled at his chest. "You won't shoot," Richard said, though his confidence was wavering. "Not with the baby in my arms." "Try me," Emily said. Her eyes were deadly serious. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Leo's crying and the crackle of the fire. Then, sirens. Faint at first, then louder, growing closer. Richard's eyes widened. "You called them?" "I called them the second your little girlfriend knocked on the door," Emily said, a grim smile touching her lips. "I knew it was a setup. I recognized the car from the road earlier." "But you're a criminal," Richard said. "Confused. You're wanted. I'm wanted for fraud. Richard, Emily said, you're currently committing assault, domestic violence, and attempted kidnapping. I'll take my chances with a plea deal. Blue and red lights flashed through the cabin windows, painting the walls in chaotic bursts of color. Put the baby down, Emily ordered. Richard looked at Leo. The boy's face was red, his eyes squeezed shut in distress. He looked at Sarah, who was sobbing quietly against the counter. He realized, with a sinking feeling, that he had lost, not just the argument, but the war. He gently placed Leo back in Sarah's arms. This isn't over. He whispered to her. Sarah looked at him, clutching her son. Yes, Richard. It is. The front door burst open. Sheriff's deputies swarmed in, guns drawn, hands in the air. Get down, now. Richard raised his hands, the pain in his broken arm finally registering. As he was shoved to the floor and handcuffed, he saw Vanessa in the doorway, being cuffed by another deputy. She was crying, and Sarah stood tall, rocking her son, watching the man she once loved being dragged away. The flashbulbs outside the King County Courthouse were blinding, a relentless strobe light that followed Richard Dalton every time he stepped out of the prisoner transport van. The media had dubbed it the Mountain Rescue Case. But inside the courtroom, it was a slow, methodical dissection of a man's ego. Richard sat at the defense table, his suit pressed, his jaw set in a line of practiced stoicism. He had hired Harrison and Associates, the most aggressive defense firm in Seattle. Their strategy was simple discredit. Sarah, they painted her as a woman unhinged by postpartum hormones, a paranoid kidnapper who had endangered their child by fleeing to a remote, frozen cabin. They argued Richard was a hero, a desperate father who had driven through the night to save his son from an unstable mother and her ex-convict associate. For the first week, it seemed like it might work. Richard was charming on the stand. He admitted to the affair with a rehearsed contrition that played well with the jury. I made a mistake in my marriage, he said, looking at the jurors with soulful eyes. But that doesn't mean I lost the right to protect my son. But the prosecution had a weapon. Richard hadn't accounted for the women he had discarded. Vanessa Cole took the stand on the fourth day. She didn't look like the glamorous Mistress anymore. She looked tired, wearing a modest grey cardigan, refusing to make eye contact with Richard, under oath, and with an immunity deal for her role in the Montana confrontation. She dismantled Richard's worried father persona. He didn't care about Leo's safety, Vanessa told the prosecutor, her voice trembling but clear. On the drive up, he wasn't talking about holding his son. He was talking about ownership. He called the baby his property. He said Sarah had stolen his asset. A ripple of unease went through the jury. And when you arrived at the cabin, the prosecutor asked. He told me to trick them. He used me as bait. And when he went inside, he didn't try to talk to her. He just attacked. He wanted to win. He told me explicitly, I'm going to destroy the life she's trying to build. Then came the digital evidence, the private investigator. Kieran had turned over his files to avoid being charged as an accomplice. The files contained text messages Richard had sent to his lawyer before Sarah even left, inquiring about strategies to gain full custody by proving maternal incompetence. The narrative shifted. This wasn't a rescue, it was a hostile takeover. The verdict came down on a Tuesday. The jury had deliberated for only 6 hours. Richard stood as the foreman read the decision. Guilty. Aggravated assault. Guilty. Reckless endangerment of a minor. Guilty. Breaking and entering. The judge, a stern woman, who had watched Richard's arrogance curdle into desperation over the course of the trial, showed no leniency. She sentenced him to 4 years in a state penitentiary, followed by 5 years of probation. But the real blow came with the family court ruling that followed Richard's parental rights were terminated. He was deemed a danger to the child's physical and emotional well-being. As the bailiffs clicked the handcuffs onto Richard's wrists, real steel this time. Heavy and cold, he looked back at the gallery. He searched for Sarah. She was there, sitting in the back row next to Emily Thorne. Sarah didn't look triumphant. She didn't smile or jeer. She just watched him with a calm, impenetrable gaze. It was the look of someone watching a storm finally pass out to sea. Richard realized then that he hadn't just lost the case. He had been erased. He was a footnote in his own son's life. 2 years later, the bell above the door of the Owl and Key bookstore chimed softly, announcing a customer. Outside, the streets of Burlington, Vermont, were blanketed in a thick, hush-inducing layer of snow. Inside, the shop smelled of old paper, vanilla candles, and wood smoke. Sarah Miller stood behind the counter, cataloguing a stack of vintage mysteries. Her hair was longer now, its natural blonde returning, though she kept it tied back in a loose, practical bun. Mama, a toddler with bright eyes and a mop of unruly curls, waddled out from the children's section. Clutching a stuffed bear, Leo was 2.5, full of energy and words. "Hey, little man," Sarah smiled, scooping him up. "Where's Auntie Em?" I'm here. Emily emerged from the back office, dusting flour off her hands. She had traded her identity theft schemes for baking. The small cafe attached to the bookstore was her domain now. "The scones are in the oven. And I think the delivery truck is stuck in the snow down on Main Street." Sarah laughed. It was a genuine sound, light and easy. It was a sound she hadn't made for years in that mausoleum of a house in Seattle. They had built a life here, a real one. Not one based on credit limits and country club memberships, but on community and safety. No one here knew about the Dalton case. To the locals, Sarah was just the nice woman who ran the bookshop, and Leo was her happy, fatherless son. Sarah walked to the front window, shifting Leo to her hip. She looked out at the falling snow. Somewhere, thousands of miles away, Richard was sitting in a cell. He was likely plotting his comeback, his appeal, his revenge, but looking at the snow piling up against the glass. Sarah felt no fear. She had walked through the fire to get here. She had outsmarted a man who thought the world belonged to him. "Look at the snow, Leo," she whispered, pressing her cheek against her son's warm head. "It's covering everything up, making it all new." Leo pressed his small hand against the cold glass and giggled. Sarah kissed his temple. She turned away from the window, away from the cold, and walked back into the warmth of the life she had chosen. Richard Dalton thought he could control everything: his career, his wife, and his secrets. But he learned the hard way that the quietest people often have the loudest breaking points. Sarah didn't just leave a marriage. She escaped a cage. In the end,